Masechet Menaḥot Daf Lamed Zayin. Tenor Banan Yadecha zo semol. A Baraita teaches that when the pasuk says V'haya leot al yadecha, that the tefillin should be a sign on your hand, that is referring to the left hand. Ata omer semol o eno ela yamin, and so then we ask the midrash as is the typical form of midrash, that's going to state the conclusion and then wonder, you say the left arm, but how do you know? Maybe it means the right arm. Talmud Omar, af yadi yaseda ares v'mini tepecha shamayim. And we quote a pasuk in Yeshaya that says, Baruch Hashem, even my hand has laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand has spread out the heavens. Now, and modern scholars would read this as parallelism and say it's saying the same thing twice. So yadi is actually parallel to Yemini, and it's a step-up parallelism. Often you have in the first half a more general term, just hand, and then or arm, and in the second half, more specifically, right arm, meaning with strength. However, the Midrash is learning it as a contrast. It's not the same. So if in the second part it says right arm, well, that means yadi is in contrast. So that means the other arm, that's the left. So you see when it says yad, just plain yad, without anything else, that means left, and so too in our pasuk in Shemot, it means the left hand regarding tefillin. Ve'omer yada haliyatet tishlachna v'mina lehalmut amelim. Another pasuk that has the same idea, and this is regarding Yael in Shirat Devorah. It says her hand she put to the tent pin, and her right Yemina to the workman's hammer, and then she took this 10-pin and killed Sisera. So it says in the right in the second part Yemina, that's the right hand, and so that's a contrast with Yada, which must mean the left hand. This actually even more than the one before. Should be read in parallelism. It's her arm, and specifically her right arm. She did it with strength. But again, the Midrash is reading it as a contrast, left arm and then right arm. Ve'omer, lama tashib yadecha v'minecha mikereb chekecha kaleh. And yet another example from Tehillim, we say, Hashem, how come you withdraw your hand? How come you're not coming and taking action? So first it says, how come you withdraw your hand and then your right hand? So that means contrasting, how come you withdraw your left hand and also your right hand? Rather, draw it out from when you're at rest, you put your hand next to your chest. So draw out your hand, draw out your sword, and Hashem, come help us. So you see in these three, the word yad is in contrast to yamin, and therefore yad by itself means semol, and that's how we know that the tefillin should be placed on the left hand. Amar Rabbi Yosef HaChorem Omer, Masinu Yamin Shenikra Yad Sheneemar, Vayad Yosef Ki Yashit Abiv Yad Yemino. Rabbi Yosef HaChorem objects to this and says, yes, true, in those three Pesukim, maybe you find Yad as referring to the left, but we also find that the word Yad is referring to the right hand. In this Pasuk, when Yaakov is blessing his grandchildren, it says that Yosef saw that Yaakov, his father, was laying his right hand on his children. And so here it says Yad Yemino, and that's the word Yad is referring to the right hand. So you see, actually, Yad can refer to the right hand. Ve'idach. So the other opinion of that we said before, how will they explain this pasuk? The answer is Yad Yemino ikre, Yad Setama la ikre. Yeah, if it says Yad Yemino, like here, it says the right hand. It says two words. Then that's referring to the right hand. But if it just says the word Yad by itself, then it's not referring to the right, but rather has to be referring to the left. And regarding tefillin, it says al yadecha, and therefore that has to be the left. Rabbi Natan omer eno sarich, hare omer ukshartam uchtavtam, ma ketiva biyamin, af keshira biyamin, vekevan de keshira biyamin, hanacha bismol hi. Rabbi Natan says, I don't need this derivation from the contrast with yamin and yad. I have a simpler way to learn it, and that is because the pasuk is back to back. First it says ukshartam, you should bind the tefillin, and then it says uchtavtam, and you should write them on the doorposts. So since these are back to back, we have a hekesh, and to learn. Just like writing is done with the right hand, so too binding should be done with the right hand. So you're going to do the binding with the right hand. Now, since you're using the right hand to put on the tefillin, you can't use your right hand to put the tefillin on your right hand. It doesn't work. So therefore, by default, you're putting it on your left hand. So it ends up being at the same conclusion, but there's conceptually a very important difference. Is the mitzvah that it should be on the left hand, on the left arm, or is the mitzvah the placement? And whenever you do a mitzvah, like anything you do in the mikdash, you do it with the right hand. It's more honorable to do it with the right hand. And the mitzvah is putting it on rather than it being on. And so to be natan is you have to put it on with the right hand. That's why by default it'll be on the left. And Rabbi Yosef HaChodem, he disagreed with the derivation that yad is different from yamin, because he said yad sometimes means the right hand. So then where will he derive that tefillin goes on the left hand? So Rabbi Yosef HaChodem can learn it the same way that Rabbi Natan does. So nobody disagrees with the law. It's just a couple of different ways of deriving it. Rav Asher Amar mi yadecha keti behe keha. Yet another few ways we're going to have to derive the left arm. Rav Asher says, since it says yadecha but it's spelt maleh, usually yadecha would be spelt with a chaf sofit. Instead it's spelt with an extra he. So that teaches us that you could read it as two words. Yad keha, the weak arm. And that for most people is the left arm. And that's why you have to put it on the weaker arm. Amar le Rabbi Abba Rav Asher ve'ema yadecha shebekoach. Rabbi Abba told Rav Asher, why don't you read it instead of a he as a het? A lot of times in derashot, he and het are replaceable. They seem to have pronounced them in a similar way. And so, how about say yad koach? And according to that, you'd put it on the mighty hand. That's the right hand for most people. Amar le miketi bechet, but the answer, it doesn't say a chet, it says a he. And so maybe you could switch a he with a chet if there's no word otherwise, but here with a he is a good word, keha, it's the weak one. So there's no reason to switch it for a chet in this case. Ketana'eh. And so now we say that there's a machloket tanaim about this. Yadecha behe zo semol. Acharim omerim yadecha lerabot et hagidem. There's two different opinions about how to explain this pasuk. One says yadecha has a he, and that means that you should put it on the weaker arm. That's the left arm. However, a different interpretation of that pasuk says yadecha is coming to include someone who is an amputee, but he has some arm. He has the upper arm from the elbow to the shoulder remains intact, and that teaches that he still has to put tefillin on his upper arm, even if he's missing his lower arm, and he would still learn it with the he. Yad keha is a weak arm. He has a weak arm. It's weak because it's a part of it is missing, and that's what this yadecha comes to teach. Tanya idach, another baraita, en lo zeroa patur min tefillin. This one says that if he does not have an arm at all, then he does not have to wear tefillin. Acherim omrim yadecha lerabot et hagidem. However, a different opinion says no. Even if he doesn't have a full arm, he's not patur, as the first opinion says, but rather he still has to wear it as long as he has enough of an arm that he can put it on. Yadecha means the weak arm, and even if it's weak and not complete, still he has to put on tefillin on that part of the arm. Tenor banan iter maniach tefillin bimino shehu semolo. Baraita says that a left-handed person has to put on the tefillin on his right arm, because his right arm is like his left. It's like other people's left, meaning it's weaker. His right arm is the weaker arm because he is a lefty. So you see, this would make sense, especially according to the Rav Asher's derasha. He's saying the weaker arm. Okay, if it's in fact the weaker arm, then you're right. So for a lefty, it would make a difference. If you learn it from what we said before as the opposite of yamin, then that would mean always never the right, always the left. So specifically the left. And so this baraita seems to be assuming the yad keha derasha. V'hatanya maniach bismolo shehu semolo shel kol adam. Wait a second, but a baraita teaches that you put it on the left hand, which is the left hand for every person. So meaning even a left-handed person should put it on the left hand because he goes by the majority of people. Amar Abaye ki tanyahi besholet b'shtei yadav. Abaye says, no, that's talking about an ambidextrous person. So since he can use both his right and left hand, so you say, well, what should he do? Well, he should follow the majority of people for whom the left hand is weaker. But if it was actually a lefty whose left hand is stronger and not his right, then he would put it on his right arm. Tana de Ben Menashe, al yadecha zo kiboret, ben anecha zo kodkod. Hecha amri de Rabbi Yanai, makom shemacho shel tinok rofes. Now, when it says al yadecha, which can mean on your hand, we don't put the tefillin on the hand, but rather on the arm. But where on the arm? So kiboret means the bicep. Right over here, we put it on the bicep. It should be a little bit lower from the shoulder, so on the bicep, but within the bicep, more towards the elbow. And ben anecha means on one's forehead or on the crown of the head. Doesn't mean literally between the eyes. It should also not be on the forehead. There's a mistake a lot of people make. Sometimes their straps are too loose and then it falls down onto the forehead, but rather it should be above the hairline. And so the Gemara says exactly where. Rabbi Yanai, the school of Rabbi Yanai says, the place where a baby's skull is soft. When a baby is born, the skull is soft so it can fit through and be born. And so that's the area right over here. I have to be careful with that area, not to smush it hard. And so that's the area where the tefillin should be. It doesn't mean it should be exactly in that point. It means that's the farthest back it should be. So tefillin can be anywhere from behind the hairline up to that point at the top of the head where where the skull is soft when it's born. So it can be higher up, in fact, but it should not be lower down on the forehead. Be'amine pelimo medebi mishiyesh lo shene rashim be'eze mehen maniach tefillin. All right, this is a very important question. Pelimo es nasi. Someone who has two heads. Which of the heads does he put tefillin on? This sounds like a nonsense question. Is he just making fun? What kind of question is this? And so the Biudan Nasi does not appreciate the question. Amale o kum gele o kabel alach shamta. Biudan Nasi says, either get up and exile Yosef, get out of here, kick yourself out, move somewhere else, or I'm going to excommunicate you for asking such a silly question. You're just making fun of us over here. Adehachi atahu gabra amaleit yelid li yenuka deitle terereshe kama ba'ina nemetav lakohen. Meanwhile, while they're talking, sure enough, someone comes into the Bet Midrash and says, I had a child born to me who has two heads, and he is the firstborn, is a bechor. So now I have to redeem him from the kohen. How much do I have to give him? Is it just 5 shekalim as one child, or maybe because he has two heads, I have to give him 10? So sure enough, look, Pelimo's question was appropriate. Atahu sabah tenele chayav liten lo 10 selaim. And a certain elder came and said, oh, you have to give 10 because you have to give 5 shekalim for each head, and this child has two heads. Ini vehatane Rami bar Chama mitoch shenemar padot tifte et bechor haadam shomea ani afilu nitraf betoch sheloshim Talmud omar ach chilek. We ask about this conclusion of this elder that he said, if there's two heads, then you have to give 10 selaim for pidyon haben. However, if a child is born with two heads, then it's going to be a terefa. It's not going to live long. It's going to be a serious problem. So there might be some kind of birth defect where there's something like two heads, but that's going to be a terefa. And we learn in the next baraita that you do not have to do pidyon haben if the baby is not going to survive 30 days. So Rami bar Chama said, since the pasuk says, Padot tifte, you shall surely redeem the firstborn of a human, I might think, even if it's a terefa that will die within 30 days, do I also have to? And that's why the pasuk says, ach. Here's the full pasuk. So while for animals, you give the actual animal to the kohen. Here, when it comes to a human, you have to redeem it. Also, unclean, meaning non-kosher animals, you can't give to the kohen as a korban. So it says the word ach, which is a limiting word, and ach says not everyone, not every human baby is going to require pidyon haben. If it's a terefa, it does not require it. And this baby that's born with such a birth defect of something like 2 heads is terefa, so therefore should be 0, not 10. And the answer is shanehacha de begulgolet tela rachamana. Here it's different because there's another pasuk also in Bamidbar chapter 3 that says velakachta hameshet shekalim la gulgolet. You need 5 shekalim per head. And so since it specifies per head, that overrides the previous darasha regarding the terefa. And since there are 2 heads, that's how he came to the conclusion that he has to redeem it with 10 shekalim. Amar mor. Now back to what we said before. Yadecha zo kiboret minelan. How do you know that when it says yadecha, that means the bicep? Maybe it actually means put it on the palm of your hand. Minelan de tanura banan al yadecha zo goba shebayad. Because the Braita teaches on your arm, that means that the height of the arm, meaning all the way up on the upper arm on the bicep. Ata omer go zo goba shebayad o eno ela al yadecha mamash. Then the Midrash asks, is that true? It's on the higher part of the arm? Maybe it means literally on the hand. Amrat Torah hanach tefillin biyad v'hanach tefillin barosh. Ma lehalan begoba shebarosh afkan begoba shebayad. Well, since the Torah says you have to put on tefillin on the arm and also on the head, so we compare them. Just like when it's on the head, it's at the height of the head. We don't put it on the side of the head or on the back of the head, but you put it all the way up, right on top of the upper part of the head. So too, on the arm, it's going to be on the upper part of the arm. Rabbi Eliezer omer, eno sarich, harehu omer, ve'ha lecha leot, ve'lo la'acherim leot. Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't need that derasha. I can learn that from in a different way. It says regarding tefillin shel yad, it will be for you as a sign, meaning it's specifically for you and not for others. So there's a fundamental difference between the tefillin shel yad, which is mostly meant for you. You keep it close at hand, to the heart. You keep it inside. It's hard to see. People are not going to see. If it's on the bicep, it's not a place that's so displayed. It's closer to you. It's inner. So that's the sign for you. Whereas the tefillin shel rosh, actually you can't see your own forehead. Rather, that is a display for others. And remember, we said before that the order of the parashiyot is for the reader, the other person who's looking at you, and it would be in from right to left according to the observer. So tefillin shel rosh is a display for others. Tefillin shel yad is mostly for ourselves. Rabbi Yitzchak omer, eno sarich, hare omer, v'samtem et debarai ele al lebabchem ukshartem, shetehe sima keneged haleb. Rabbi Yitzchak says, no, I don't need that. I have another way of learning it. It says you should put these words upon your heart and tie them. So what do you mean upon your heart? So we're putting that together. You should tie them, bind them in a place that's near one's heart. And certainly if it's the left hand, then on the left arm, where's the closest to the heart? On the left arm, it's up at the bicep. So that signifies keeping the words close to our heart, that they should be on our minds. We should care about them always. Rabbi Chia v'Rav Acha bered Rav Avya mechaven umanach lehadeh libe. Rabbi Chia and Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avya, they would place the tefillin close to their heart. So they in fact did that, as we said. Rav Asher havayativ kameh de amemar hava sir yabide v'kamit hazyan tefillin. And it was one time Rav Asher was sitting and studying before Amemar, and there was a tear, a cut in his sleeve, and his tefillin on his arm could be seen by everybody else. Amar le lo savar la amor lecha leot velo lacherim leot. And so Rav Asher asked, does the master not agree with this derasha that it should be a sign for you and not for others? So you see that most of the time they would put on the tefillin shel yad and then cover it with a cloak or with a sleeve. And here it's exposed. So why is it exposed? You don't agree with that? Amar le b'makom lecha leot itemar. And The Amemad answered, no, that means that it should be in a place where it will be a sign for you. So indeed, that is the bicep, but it doesn't mean it's prohibited for anyone else to see it. It's not that it has to be private and you have to hide it from everybody else. It's just that this is not the prominent place. It's here in a place that's going to be a reminder to me all the time. I'm always looking at my arm. I'm always thinking about it next to my heart. And so it's for me, but it doesn't mean that I have to cover it over. Goba shebarosh minelan. Now, how do you know that you put the tefillin at the height of the head? Maybe it means between your eyes, literally down between your eyes. Tenura banan ben einecha zo goba shebarosh. Ata omer zo goba shebarosh o ano ela ben einecha mamash. A Braita says between your eyes. That means at the top of the head. And it asks, is that true at the top of the head? Maybe it means literally between the eyes. Nemar kan ben einecha v'nemar lehalan no tasimu korcha ben einechem lamet. Ma lehalan begoba shebarosh makom she'oseh korcha afkan begoba shel rosh makom she'oseh korcha. And so the answer says that we have here the phrase between your eyes, and this same phrase comes up another time in Devarim, where it says you're not allowed to gash yourselves, you're not allowed to make a bald spot between your eyes over the dead. This was an ancient mourning custom that they would gash themselves and pull out the hair on top of their head to make a bald spot to show their grief. Torah says that's not allowed. Now, to make a bald spot, that you can't make a bald spot unless it's in a place where there is hair. And so therefore, obviously, even though it says ben einechem, it doesn't mean literally between one's eyes. Rather, it's an expression. Ben einechem, it means don't make a bald spot on top of your head. And so just like over there, it has to be on top of the head. So a place where you could make a bald spot because there's hair there, that's why it has to be above the hairline. And note, that means the entire tefillin, even the front edge of it, should be behind the hairline. So to here, it means at the top of the head, in a place where one could be bald. Of course, if someone is in fact balding, then you don't have to put it all the way back where there's hair, if there's any hair left, but rather at the place behind the hairline where the hairline used to be when a person had hair. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Eno sarich amra Torah, hanach tefillin bayad, hanach tefillin barosh. Malalan b'makom hara'ui litameh benega ehad, afkan b'makom hara'ui litameh benega echad. Yehuda says, no, I don't need that derivation. I have a different one to teach me the same thing. Since the Torah says you should put on tefillin on the hand, it also says on the head. So just like over there, it's a place that can become tameh with only one type of sarat. Also here, we put in a place that can become tameh only with one type of sarat. The laws of sarat, there are many types of sarat. There's one type that goes on skin. If it's a place that has just skin and no hair, then a white hair would mean that's sarat. If it's a place where there's hair, then yellow hair would mean that is sarat. So therefore, the hand or arm, even whether it's a hand or a bicep, is a place where there's no hair. And therefore, there's only one type of sarat that could be applicable there if you saw a white hair. So too, regarding the one shel rosh, has to be in a place where there's only one. So if it's on top of the head where there's hair, then also that only one type of sarat could be there. If you would see a yellow hair, that would mean sarat. And that comes to exclude. La puke ben einecha, tika basar ve'se'ar, tika sar laban ve'ika name se'ar sahab. That would exclude literally between the eyes, because between the eyes, you have the parts of it have hair, like the eyebrows, and then parts of it have no hair, like beyond the eyebrows, right between the eyes. And so in that area, there are two possible types of sarat that can occur, because you have one that will be a sign based on a white hair where there's just skin, and also based on yellow hair where there is hair. And so it can't possibly be between the eyes literally, because you have two types of sarat there. Therefore, we make an analogy, and just like on the arm, our hand or bicep is only one type of sarat, so too the rosh has to be on top of the head where there is hair, and therefore only one type of sarat that can occur in that spot. The next part of the Mishnah taught, Arba sisiyot me'akebot zo et zo, she'arba'atan misva achat. The four fringes that one puts on a four-cornered garment are all required for each other, because the four are all one mitzvah. And so you need all four in order to fulfill the mitzvah. You have only three or less, then it's as if you have nothing. Rabbi Ishmael in the Mishnah disagrees and says each of the four are four separate mitzvot. And that means even if you don't have one of them, but you have one, you have either three or two or one, you still fulfill that mitzvah of each one separately. My benaihu, what will be a practical difference between the two opinions? Amar Rav Yosef, sadin besisit ika benaihu. Difference would be if you have a linen sheet, that's sadin, and you have wool fringes. Now that is shatnez, wool and linen. If you have all the sisit that you need, then it's permitted because the mitzvah of sisit overrides the prohibition of shatnez. So everybody would agree if you have a four-cornered garment with four proper sisiot, and one is wool and one is linen, that's okay. However, what if it's missing some of the sisit? What if it has only three sisit on three of the corners? According to Tanakama, you'd be violating shatnez by wearing that because there's no mitzvah. You don't fulfill any mitzvah of sisit here, so you're just wearing a garment of wool and linen. So you're violating. Whereas according to the Ishmael, okay, you don't have four of them, you have three of them. So good, each one is its own mitzvah, and therefore each one, if let's say you have only one of them, that's a mitzvah of sisit, and therefore it overrides the problem of shatnez on that corner, and same if you had two or three corners in that same way. Rava bar Ahina amar talit ba'alat hamesh ika benaihu. Or another difference between these two opinions, if you have a garment that has five corners, we're about to learn that even if you have five corners, you do have to put on tefillin, you have to put on tzitzit. Question is, how many of the corners require tzitzit? According to the Ishmael, that each mitzvah is separate. That means each and every corner has its own obligation. So if you have a five-cornered garment, you would need five sisiot to put on it. However, according to Tanakama, the number is four. So therefore, you only pick four of the corners, and you only have to put it on four corners, not on five. Ravina Amar, the Rav Huna ika benaihu. The Amar Rav Huna, hayose betalit she'ena mesuyeset kilchata b'Shabbat chayav chatat. Ravina says another difference, that of the law of Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, if one walks outside on Shabbat wearing a talit that does not have proper sisiot, he is liable to a korban chatat, if he does it by mistake, for carrying. Now what is he carrying? Let's say someone has a proper talit with sisiot. Good. Then he's not carrying because the fringes, the sisiot, are necessary for the mitzvah. So he wants them. They're part of the garment. They're part of the mitzvah. That's good. But let's say he has a talit that has only one or two or three sisiot on it. According to the Ishmael, that's also good. Okay, he has a garment. It has proper sisit. He's not carrying this. He's not considered carrying. He's wearing it because they are proper part of the mitzvah and therefore a proper part of the garment. However, according to Tanakama, it has only three sisiot on it. Well, those three sisiot don't fulfill the mitzvah of sisit. So what are they there for? They're not part of the garment. You would only put them on there in order to try to fulfill the mitzvah, but you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, and therefore you're carrying those sitziot. And that's carrying on Shabbat. Amar Rav Shisha bere de Rav Idi. Hayman de basre legilime la avad vela kelum shavia talit balat hamesh. Now, people would try various strategies in order to change the garment in some way so that it will not be required to put tzitzit on it, so they don't have to bother with it. But they're not all going to work. So Rav Shisha, the son of Ravidi, says, someone who cuts the corner of his garment has not done anything to remove the obligation at all, because now he just made a four-cornered garment into a five-cornered garment. There's a couple of ways you can think of this. This is the simplest way. If you cut off a corner, you say, oh, look, there's only three corners on there. I don't have to put on tzitzit. Not true. Now you have a five-cornered garment, and a five-cornered garment still requires tzitzit. You could also cut it in this way, cut the corner out like this. But again, you're going to have five corners, and you're going to have to still put tzitzit on it. Amar Rab Meshashia, Hayman de Saireh ligilime la abad vela kelum. If someone ties his garment, he has not done anything. My ta'ama de keman de Saireh dameh. It's as if they are loosened. How would he tie it? he might take the two corners and tie them together, and another two corners and tie them together. And so now if you look at the garment, you say, oh, it only has two corners, so it doesn't require tzitzit. And so if he does something like that, it does not help, because even though it's a tie, it's considered a temporary tie. So we consider it as if there's no tie and it's still a four-cornered garment. And we can prove that this is so from a Mishnah in Masechet Kelim. It says, Utnan nameh, kol hamatot haserurot tehorot chutz mishel araviyim. Any water jugs that are tied are still tahor. The law of Tuman Tahara is if something is a vessel, then it can receive tum'ah. But if it's not a vessel, it's just a plain piece of leather, then it will not receive tum'ah. So if you have a jug of the Arabs, the jug of the Arabs will take tum'ah, is susceptible to tum'ah because they tie them together with a permanent knot. So you take some kind of hide of an animal and they would tie it permanently or sew it so that it became a utensil. However, other people didn't do that. They took a hide of an animal and just made temporary knots and made it into a jug. Fine, it could hold water, but it's only a temporary knot. And says there that it is not susceptible to tum'ah, meaning that we consider it as if the knots aren't there. If something just has a temporary knot, it doesn't become a new thing because of the knots. We consider it as if it doesn't have it. So too here, if you tie something up, and then you say, oh, look, it only has two corners. We say, no, that's a temporary knot, and therefore it does not become a new thing. The four corners are still there. Amar Rav Dimi Menaḥot Hayman de hayte legilime la'avad ve'la'kelum imita de la miba'ele lifsik ve'lishte. If someone sews his garment, okay, instead of tying it, you say, oh, it's only a temporary knot. Let's say he sews it up. He might sew it up like this. Sew it up like this. Now you see there's only two corners. Or he might sew up each of the corners like this, fold it and sew it. And he says, look, oh, see, there's no corners here, so I don't have to put on a tzitzit. No, he has done nothing. Because if it's so that he really doesn't want that part, so why doesn't he cut it off and throw it away, right? Just cut off this part, maybe cut off this whole one sheet. You don't want it. You only want one half of it. Is that why you tied it? So cut off the whole thing. Or the corners. You don't want the corners. How come you didn't just cut them off? Obviously, you actually do want them there. That's why you didn't cut them off. So you see, it's as if it does have a corner and is still obligated in tzitzit. Rabbi Ishmael Omer, Arba'atan, Arba' mitzvot. Back to the Mishnah where Rabbi Ishmael disagrees with Tana Kama and says that each of the four fringes is its own mitzvah. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shemuel halacha ke Rabbi Ishmael, velet hilcheta kevateh. Shemuel rules that the halacha follows Rabbi Ishmael. However, the anonymous voice of the Gemara disagrees with that and says that halacha is not like Shemuel. Ravina hava ka'azil abatre demor bar Rav Asher beshabeta derigla. One time, Ravina was walking behind Mor bar Rav Asher on the Shabbat of the festival, on Shabbat Hol HaMoed. That was a special Shabbat because then the sage would go and give a public lecture where everybody came to the lecture, the masses, the students, other sages, and so Ravina is going, and Mor bar Rav Asher is going to give this lecture. Ifsik karna dehote vela amar le vela midi. So on the way, Mor bar Rav Asher is wearing tzitzit. However, one of the tzitsiyot, one of the fringes, tore, and now he only has three. And we said halacha is like the Tana Kama, and if you're wearing only three, then only three and not four, then you do not fulfill the mitzvah. If you don't fulfill the mitzvah, then the tzitsiyot that are hanging there, that remain, is carrying, because it's not part of the garment and it's not necessary for the mitzvah. So in the end, he's carrying. Now, Mor bar Rav Asher did not realize that one of his tzitsiyot ripped, so he's just continuing to walk. And the student, Ravina, decided not to say anything because is going to be stuck. If he says something, then Mor bar Rav Asher is going to have to take off his garment. This is his shirt, his cloak. He's going to have no shirt on. And he doesn't want that to happen. And if he tells him and he doesn't take off his shirt, then he knowingly is violating Shabbat. So he says, I'm not going to tell him anything while he's walking. Once he got to his house, I guess it's after the lecture, and he's walking back to his house. So then the Ravina said, listen, by the way, back there, when you were in the middle of the road, your sisit broke, and I didn't tell you till now. Amar le I amart li mehatam shedite. And Mordechai bar Rav Ashi says, had you told me, I would have taken off my garment right then and there, rather than carry on Shabbat. Veha amar mod, we ask about this story. Gadol kevod habiriyot shedochet lo ta'aseh shebat Torah. However, we have a tradition that greater is the honor of a human being is even greater than a lo ta'aseh in the Torah. So to take off your cloak and walk without clothes on, that is a violation of human dignity. And therefore, even if he had known that he was carrying, because even had he known that the sisit was broken and he was carrying, he still wouldn't have to take it off, because that would be dishonorable. And human dignity is so important that it overrides a violation of Shabbat. So therefore, why did he say he would have taken off his cloak? He should have left it on. And the answer is Targuma Rav Bar Shabbat Shekamed Rav Kahana Belav de lo Tasur. And we answer that Rav Bar Shabbat explained this statement when it says that Kevod HaBeriyot is more important than the lo ta'aseh. It doesn't mean any lo ta'aseh of the Torah, but rather only one specific one. The lo ta'aseh that says, do not veer from what the judges will tell you right or left. This is the source for the authority of the rabbis to legislate law. So in fact, Kavod HaBeriyot is very important. However, it can only override a D'Rabbanan law that we are obligated to follow because of Lo Tasur. But any other law that's Deoraita, like Shabbat, Kavod HaBeriyot does not override. Okay, but I'm going to be not dignified. I'm going to feel exposed walking without clothes on. Okay, too bad, it's Shabbat. So Shabbat is more important. And that's why he said that he would have taken off his cloak. Vika Damre, there's another version of this story. Mehatam amarle, that in fact Ravina told him there on the spot. As soon as he saw it, he said, Master, Mor bar Rav Ashi, you just tore a sisit. V'amarle, my da'atich lemishteyeh. And so Mor bar Rav Ashi says, oh, why are you telling me this? You think I should take off my garment right here and just walk home without clothes? V'amar Mor, gadol kevod HaBeriyot shedoche et lo ta'aseh shebat Torah. Mor bar Rav Ashi says, don't we have the tradition that human dignity is more important even than a lo ta'aseh? So why are you telling me? Are you suggesting that I should remove my cloak? No, I don't have to remove my cloak, even though I know that I'm carrying. Targuma Rav Bar Shabbat Kamed Rav Kana Belav de lo Tasur. But we ask, but didn't we explain that rule is only for the lo ta'aseh lo tasur, meaning only if it's a D'Rabbanan, then human dignity overrides a law, but not if it's a different law in the Torah, and Shabbat is a deoraita, and therefore, yes, he should take off his cloak. He explains, Hachenameh karmalit Rabbanan hi. This road that we're walking down is not a Reshut HaRabim deoraita. You need a lot of qualifications to be a Reshut HaRabim deoraita. This is a karmelit. This is a Reshut HaRabim only midrabbanan. So therefore, continuing to walk home as in fact only violating carrying midrabanan. And so everybody agrees that Kevod HaBeriyot overrides a lav that's only a derabanan, and therefore, okay, thank you for telling me, but it doesn't mean I should take off my cloak. And so he continued and walked home with his cloak on. Hadran alach hakomes. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.